So I was playing Halo Reach on the Master Chief Collection and wanted to actually make a video on what makes the AI in that so great. And I noticed that people tend to focus more on the technical features of the AI and not why they resonate with the player so much or how the designer has designed them to achieve that.
Yeah, boy.
Hi, my name is Ibraheem Mustafa. I'm an aspiring indie dev, and I think the way we look at AI is wrong, whether it's animals, NPCs, enemies, allies, whatever they are. And I don't think it does them justice when we reduce them to features instead of looking at why they affect the player in the way they do and how they achieve that. So I did some research of my own, looking at all the AI from my favourite games, and although the AI were wildly different in their visuals, their features, their functions, their roles in the game that they played, the game's genre itself, they all had two specific things that they all did. So I used that to come up with my own process, and I wanted to share it with you guys and see what you thought. So don't get me wrong, there are a lot of great videos on AI. AI in Games, for example, puts out some great videos, but his videos more focus on how they work, technical innovations, and then what specific examples do. And if you're watching this video, I'm sure you've already seen GameMaker's Toolkit's video on what makes good AI.
Hi, I'm Mark Brown.
Oh, hi, Mark.
And this is GameMaker's Toolkit.
And if you haven't, there's a link in the description. It's a great video, I recommend you watch it. But while I completely agree with his points, after learning more and re-watching it, I completely disagreed with the video's overall message, and don't think he actually answers the question of what makes good AI. The issue with the video stems from not the information he gives out, but more his approach to the topic. He acknowledges that you can't copy and paste features from one game into the other, because it won't work in certain contexts, but then goes on to list a bunch of good practices that won't work in a lot of games. One of the points he made was predictability, which he was correct on in the context he used, but how predictable are you supposed to make them? What if they're animals and they need to be unpredictable? Left 4 Dead uses some predictability to decrease repetitiveness. Every run you do is memorable and unique in some way, and in some cases even randomness is good. So my point is, it's all subjective, and we can't give out guidelines and good practices, and instead we need a method to decide what features we actually use. Trico actually seems like a real animal in The Last Guardian because it's unpredictable and doesn't listen to you all the time. He goes and explores and does his own thing half the time, climbing on stuff and knocking stuff over. It builds this huge emotional payoff later when he actually starts listening to you more, because you feel like you've earned it and you've created a relationship with this real animal. So how do we learn from such a specific example and apply those lessons to other AI? All they did was they created a world, they put 2 characters in it that were dependent on each other in a realistic fashion, and they made Trico your companion. Instead of some one-dimensional person walking alongside you, this really nuanced animal who's lovable, loyal, just very realistic, and that's why it makes the player feel. And by realism, I'm not referring to actually being realistic to real life, referring to the concept of verisimilitude, which essentially just means the believability or lifelikeness that a story or a fictional world has. I'm going to go more in depth on how games do this later on. Some great examples of this in movies are the Studio Ghibli movies and movies like The Road.
In order to tell a compelling and effective story, storytellers must construct an immersive world in which that story takes place, a process known as world building. Some stories require more detailed world building than others, but in the end the point is the same. Suspend our disbelief, draw us in, make us buy into the world you've created.
And something I really want to promote is a more open mind when looking for inspiration. Now this can be used for anything, but in the context of creating AI, don't put yourself in a box and limit yourself to a certain genre that you need to be working on. Just look to what you love, and even if that's in a different medium, if you like a certain character in a book or a movie, make a game version of them. Because the stuff that makes AI great, which I'll go on to in detail later, transcends genre and the medium. It's more about what they do for the player, isn't it? And that's the end goal. So let me just give you Halo as an example, as it's mainly my reason for making this video, and also it relates to Mark's video too. One thing that Mark says is that you can't use Halo and Fear as examples for all good AI because they are aggressive, and I think that statement doesn't really take into consideration just what makes them so great.
But the thing is, aggressive enemies just don't work for every type of game.
Which is true if you plan to copy and paste AI into your game just because it works for another one. But if you're actually seriously trying to design a game, you would have a creative process and not just look at symptoms of great AI. What I've taken from Halo is not the actual AI design in its whole concept, not the aggressive behaviour. I'm taking away the level of depth the AI has, whether it's their racial personalities and how everything about them plays into that personality, whether it's the way they look, the sounds they make, the animations they have, the posture, fighting styles, the weapons they use, how they react to the player, their group dynamics and the hierarchies within those groups. Everything pays into that. Also how well they telegraph the intent of the AI, and the developers have made over 5,000 lines of dialogue for these AI. That's what I find great about Halo, and this.
What do you mean, Drew?
So why have I said all that? Well, I came into this wanting to learn how to make AI that make my player feel something. You know, send a message across to the player and impact them in real life, like I have been by, you know, so many of the games I've played. I took a break last year because I started working on my game and I realised how shallow my knowledge of game development was. I found that the stuff that really helped me was not stuff on game development, it was more on writing for books and movies. The break was a bit longer than I'd hoped because a few months down the line I had a head injury that gave me brain damage and a whole host of other issues. So if you think the video's all over the place, you know why. But back onto topic, Monster Hunter was a big one for me when I was younger. I know Dark Souls has helped a lot of people with depression. As I mentioned with my head injury, playing Doom 2016 really helped me. I got into a really bad state of mind after it. It really wore me down and gave me quite bad anxiety. I'll probably do a video on how it helped me and what came out of it, I guess. So I want to do something like that. And as I got further in my research, I found that in a video talking about making good AI for games, like not using a specific example of a type of AI or a game's AI, that's fair enough, and I'd love to do that. I'd have a video idea on intelligent AI and maybe the different types like NPCs and stuff, but in general you can't speak about AI in isolation because they don't exist in isolation. They were designed as part of the game and need to be spoke about with that in mind. If you do have your own ideas on AI, start a discussion below, I'll respond. Tell me your favourites and why. I'd love to find something new to play, especially something multiplayer. I've got my eyes on that GTFO game at the moment. So what do I think is missing? Well, it's storytelling.
They were going on and on about how they'd create this vast open world with a branching storyline, how you'd be able to customize your character through in-game choices. And it's not something I knew before, but I was excited by. And I'm always drawn to fascinating stories.
As someone who actually works in marketing, I understand the power of story on a person. Whether you like it or not, when you're told a story, you'll try to apply or relate it to yourself or take some meaning from it. It's just how we're built as people. That's why ads use them, music videos use them all the time, and the songs too. YouTube videos use them. Why do you think PewDiePie's Minecraft series was so big? It was because he made up a story within that world. Jokes use story structure, and we can go back thousands of years. Look at holy books like the Quran and the Bible. So I think that storytelling and world building has been really undermined in the gaming industry, and I think it is because the majority of big studios don't really touch anything. They can't put loot boxes in.
Surprise mechanics.
A lot of single player games have been cancelled because they just can't make as much money off of them. And actually you'll find that a lot of these games that don't use storytelling or world building will use storytelling in their ads. You know, COD World War 2, it's back to boots on the ground. Black Ops 4, why do you think they've got Black Ops in the name? Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the most recent one, it's called Modern Warfare. Also, it's back to classic Call of Duty, which it isn't. It's a lot easier to sell a dream and get players addicted than make games with engaging stories and worlds that are like rich with mystery and lore, have characters that people can relate to.
It sucks playing the shit! I'm fucking addicted! So I can't quit!
Well, bear in mind, I'm not saying that the game needs to be heavily scripted. Games just need to have a well-built world, and AI are a big part of that. Games like Minecraft, Terraria are a perfect example of that. They give you all the tools you need to make your own stories. That's why I think games like Rust and DayZ were so popular. So here's what I'm saying. We need to treat AI in the same way as if we were writing characters for any story, but then adapt the creative process to account for game mechanics. Here's how John Truby put it, and if you don't know who this legend is, his students have gone on to write Sleepless in Seattle, Scream, and Shrek. So let's just listen to him. So in his book, The Anatomy of a Story, I highly recommend it. We will create the characters not by pulling them out of thin air, but by drawing them out of your original story idea. We will connect and compare each character to every other character so that each one is strong and well defined. Then we'll figure out the function each must perform in helping your hero develop. So here's the way I've thought of designing AI. In every story, first thing you need to figure out is what the armature or theme is. It's your basic premise. It's what you want to say with your piece, or in a game sense it could also be just how you want the player to feel. And from there you have to highlight a desire or flaw of the protagonist which will relate to the armature, and that's where you'll start. If you're confused on how to find your armature, a place to start is just to look at what you think about. What's important to you? In general, what do you want to communicate with your game? What do your favourite games make you feel? What lessons have you been taught? Look for that. If you're still stuck, have a look at this pyramid of needs, find anything you want to cover, and then create a world that will allow the players to explore. It could include multiple. Games like Minecraft include pretty much all of the levels, but you start at the bottom and work your way up. The player will then struggle trying to get what they desire throughout the story. You don't need to try to make it overly complex. It doesn't even have to be a moral or even a problem. Just make it personal to you, and there'll be people out there that will identify with it. It could be as simple as a puzzle like Portal, a simple need to solve the puzzle wanting to know more, or a survive and explore like Subnautica. The problem could be something even less complex, but still understandable. Like in Left 4 Dead, get to safety, the safe room, and avoid being alone, or rely on friendship in dark times. In games like Raft, Stranded Deep, and The Long Dark, it's just about surviving in general. You know, finding food, clean water, shelter, and protecting yourself from animals.
And I find it to be something more than a game for me. Not to get too personal, but we have players who have, you know, suffered loss, and for them they found the escaping into the wilderness of the Long Dark to be sort of, again, a cathartic kind of meditative thing. We've had people who've struggled with substance abuse that have contacted us to say, you know, I was really struggling with this issue, and really your game kind of gave me some kind of an anchor that I could escape into.
Although I do disagree with his usage of the term escapism, I don't think the Long Dark promotes escapism. When people go into the Long Dark, it immerses them, it teaches them something, it makes them feel something, it gives them certain experiences, and that isn't escapism. Escapism doesn't help you deal with the issues that you have. Escapism is avoiding your problems. In a gaming sense, it'd be something like Call of Duty. I really want to do videos on the psychology of gaming and show you guys how certain games try to manipulate the player and get them addicted and puts them through the same sort of psychological cycles that gambling does. And back on topic, it could be variations of the same need. Thomas Was Alone doesn't have AI in it, but the way they make the characters talk and project their thoughts is great. It makes them seem actually real, especially for quadrilaterals. It deals with wanting companionship in so many different ways, with all the characters in the game all dealing with the subject in their own personal way, and the puzzles forcing them into a situation where they need to help each other to get through, and towards the end they get separated and get over their differences and work together using their individual strengths for a single purpose. It's a really nice conclusion. I recommend you play it if you haven't. So once you know what you want to communicate to your player and you've got an idea for your story and world, we'll use those details to create the perfect AI for that game. I'll first explain what the process is and why, and then go into detail on how you actually put it into practice. So as Truby said, the AI needs to fit in as a character in the world it's made to exist in and have a role in that world. The player should be put into a world that doesn't seem like it was specifically made for them. Make the AI seem like they understand what's going on around them and they actually exist in the world that you build for them. One of the things I loved about the NPCs in Bethesda's games like Fallout and Oblivion, all the NPCs had like some little thing to tell you about what's going on around them. They had some sort of affiliation and could give you just like a small bit of world building to make them seem like they actually live there and they have a purpose apart from providing you with some sort of gameplay. It's really annoying when I see AI just looking like it's waiting for me to show up instead of it having its own purpose. You know, like in Tenchu Shadow Assassins, it's fair enough because they're guards and they're watching their certain area, so it makes sense. It doesn't feel like they're waiting for me, but in some games it just feels like you need to get in within a certain distance for them to turn their brain on or something. It just doesn't feel natural. An easy fix to this could be adding in a certain amount of land they can walk when they're in an unalerted state, or even giving them a few lines of individual dialogue, something random to say like they complain about something back home. And if you're going to make an NPC that I have to talk to multiple times, please don't give them one line of dialogue.
Oh thank God. Oh thank God. Oh thank God.
What I'm saying is I want them to appear like life would go on without you, like Cornifer in Hollow Knight, who travels around making maps, and you can miss him quite a lot of the time, and you know, you talk to his wife up top and she'll talk about him. The demons in Doom will fight each other if you watch from a distance. That's hilarious, just seeing them beat each other up. And again, Trico from The Last Guardian is a perfect example. I do understand that there are some like Mr. X that have no purpose but to really follow the player, but actually that isn't true. There is a purpose for him that ties into the narrative. He isn't following the player, he's been ordered to kill all remaining civilians and police officers and collect the G-Virus from Sherry, who you're protecting, and so it makes sense, and Mr. X adds to the story. So here's the next step. We need to make the AI relevant to the player's struggles. The player needs to be given the opportunity to grow and learn while playing the game, and that's what the AI's job is. Just like in the climax of a movie, it feels like they deserve the results they get. Everything in the game, including the AI, needs to be built up to make the player feel the way the designer intended for them to feel and help them get to their goal. That could be by allies helping you along the way and teaching you stuff, and it could just be with NPCs increasing immersion, making the player actually want to play more, and finally with enemies, it's actually creating an obstacle that the player wants to overcome and move forward through. Here's some fast examples of how different AI do it. In Left 4 Dead, specials can take out a single person really easily, and the longer you take to get to the safe room, the more hordes spawn in. So it's teamwork, communication, and running like hell to the safe room and not dwelling. Halo, the AI is smart, they're soldiers, they'll destroy you for making bad plays. So what do you need to do? You need to figure out the enemy, their personalities, how they'll react to you, and then use that and destroy them using your smarts. In Monster Hunter, the AI are unpredictable as they're animals, but they telegraph heavily. It gets you into the mindset of hunting. You need to attack in between the monster's attacks, so learning telegraphing is important to not getting hit. And the newer games actually forgive you for overcommitting with the parry move, but the catch is that you need to get the timing on point, so you need to master the monster's timing. I personally disagree with this. I think the newer games make it feel more like trophy hunting than actual hunting for survival. It's veered away from the David versus Goliath feel, and in Sonic you want to go as fast as possible. The AI is super simple and they're basically part of the level design. All you have to do is learn the map and learn where the enemies are, so you can get through as fast as possible and know where to jump. At least in the Sega Mega Drive version they did. That's the one I played. So to apply this, you need to both look at your armature and how you want the player to feel, and also where you put your character in the start and what you want the player to actually do to get to the end. So just start with relationships to the player that you need to put into the game. You can have multiple AI in each of those roles and space them out in the game, maybe having more difficult ones later and starting off with easier versions. You know, like in one of my favourite games, Game Ground, the AI is super simple, they have variations of them, but it's more about the positioning and making you choose different players and play tactically in that sense, and also coordinating with the second player if you have somebody to play with you. If you want to see this in practice, NoClip has done an amazing video with Hugo Martin on the AI design of Doom Eternal, and you can really tell an expert in a field when they put it as simply as he does.
The point of this is because we know one of the elements of the fun zone is to get the player to move. We know that this will make the player move. Believe me, you're going to track this thing as soon as it comes out. And she pushes the player around more than anybody else, and anytime the player's moving like that, it just feels really good. And you're going to prioritize her, which is another one of the really important things of the Doom dance that makes it feel really good. So she slithers across the floor, you're going to track her with your guns. She does kind of make you also use certain weapons, because we think of the weapons like tools, and the AI are kind of like problems.
And if you watch the video, you'll notice how he refers to AI design more as creating characters and how they should have personalities even if they're not human, and how much he references movies and the characters in there. So after we figure out its place in the world and the relevance to the player, when designing the AI, we need to be able to tell you more about the world they live in and themselves. Everything in their design should have some sort of story or explanation, no matter how small the detail. Like Joel's watch in The Last of Us, which if you've played, you know how significant it is to his character, and even if it seems like it won't be picked up by the player, they might not notice it, or it's just not that important for the amount of time it'll take, do it anyway, because for one, it'll make the rest of the process a lot easier, and two, it is important to the player and they will notice it, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. It might take more time in your development, but your game will be out there forever, and so will the impact and experiences of your players. And great AI use all of these little details to communicate the designer's ideas and imagination to the players implicitly. It follows the logic of show don't tell. The way we'll do this mainly when we're designing characters is using indirect communication. So this is stuff like tone of voice, facial expressions, colours, shapes. There's some great videos on what shapes and colours mean in character design, body language, and even how the AI interacts with you. Here's a great video from Lessons from the Screenplay where he interviews the writer and creative director of The Last of Us.
The way she's talking and the way she's experiencing the scene and her demeanor is going to change how you feel about her. So for example, after Ellie and Joel get in a fight in the hotel in Pittsburgh,
and you just hang back like I told you to.
You could see her, she's crossing her arms more, she's more standoffish, she's talking less than she's used to. Where again, in a film, you can control the pacing and the exact shots. Here, it's just like, oh, this person that's walking with me is behaving differently. This is what it feels like to be in a fight.
And they should not only tell you about the world and themselves, as you should remember, they should also do something for the player. They should tell you who you are in relation to them. Here's an example from Halo's famous talk, The Illusion of Intelligence.
We wanted an AI that could be impressed. The player wants to be important. We create this entire game universe just to put him at the center of it, and part of being at the center of your own universe means you're the biggest badass in the room. In Halo, everyone has a reaction to seeing the player for the first time. The grunts are surprised and they run away in terror. The elites usually see you as a threat, and so they immediately start targeting you and making sure you can't get away. The Marines, on the other hand, are just impressed. They stare at you and they make comments like, wow, it's him, or I didn't think he'd be so tall. Players really respond well to this because it makes them feel like they're the ones that are impressive.
The players need to be given enough evidence to draw inferences from those. Tanks look like a gorilla, they run like one and sound like one. When I get hit, it's probably going to hurt like one.
It's all over now.
Give them the whole picture, but make it like a jigsaw, where it's pretty obvious, but you get the player to piece it together. Let them feel like Phoenix Wright, and that their power of deduction is what gets them through the game. In a lot of games that focus on human interaction and decision making, like Detroit Become Human, the Telltale series, Life is Strange, etc, etc, you don't need to be so loud about it, but give the AI lots of opportunities to show who they are to the player.
Oh no, classic blonde bully.
Like close-ups on the face, show players how they treat people and act in certain situations. The scene in the video you're seeing right now is from Life is Strange. This game does a really good job of showing you close-ups of each of the characters in certain situations at the start, so you know exactly who they are, what their situation is, and how to act accordingly, even before you know their names. However, in combat games you need to be over the top. With the amount of stress the game puts you under and the amount of AI actually on the screen probably at a time, you won't pick up on it if it isn't overdone. Here's what the Halo devs say about it.
If it's not totally obvious, it's too subtle. Even if you make something as obvious as you can possibly make it, most of the people will miss it the first 3 times they see it. For example, in Halo, the grunts run away when the elite is killed. Initially, nobody in our playtests noticed this, so we had to keep adding clues to make it more obvious. By the time we shipped the game, we had made it so not only does every single grunt run away every single time an elite is killed, they have an outrageously exaggerated panic run where they wave their hands above their head, they scream in terror, and half the time one of them will say, "Leader dead, run away." I would estimate that less than a third of our users made the connection.
You also need to account for non-gamers that aren't used to the way the medium communicates to the player. Rasputin is a great series where he analyzes how his wife, who isn't a gamer, plays games. It's really interesting. I've learned a lot from it, because you take a lot for granted as somebody who's grown up playing games. Here's a list of things I think you could include in them. Having a personality, or at least some sort of temperament, motivations, traits of sorts. Give them self-preservatory behavior if they're alive or human or whatever. They need to care about their life. It's weird a lot of the times when AI will just continue to stand in fire and shoot you. It's quite cool when AI will dodge grenades, or interactions in a wider society and hierarchies are really important. You know, show who they are and what their role is and who's above and below them, because a lot of times this can bring personality out of people, you know, hating the people on top or looking down on the people below. And most importantly, make them relevant to the player, even if it's in the smallest way where they do give world building like the NPCs do. And they should all be their own distinct entity to make them more memorable and present their own unique problems. But Game Maker's Toolkit is a great video on how Doom does this. Don't include all of these points like a checklist. There are more points that you could include that I haven't mentioned. It's all subjective. Fun is subjective. Great AI in some games will not be fun to some people because they don't like that genre. So you need to use this creative process. Think about all the information you've summed up about these AI and design with reason. A great example of this are the special effects in Left 4 Dead. Everything unique about them, from the physical attributes to their behaviors, their form of attacking, and even the sound they make, has been deconstructed by the players to find out the origins of all these mutations and why they have mutated to be like that. Just read this comment explaining the witch's long nails and why they're so sad. It sounds crazy, but to me it makes sense because all those pieces kind of come together. But it's not just the enemies that have made a mark on the players, it's the characters, their individuality.
Alright guys, the only way we're gonna make it out of this alive is if we stick together, so... My friends call me Coach! Coach, anything!
How they speak to each other, whether it's comfort, banter, warning each other, or just chatting.
One time when a ghost stabbed him from behind and took all his money, and he might have just been a homeless guy because he had a robe on with 2 eyes cut out his face.
It's also the people we'll never meet who have written on the walls of the safe rooms, talking about Cedar and how the world ended. For evidence of how important this is, just look at Wow Such Gaming's channel. His videos explaining how the Special Infected became what they were, and how the world ended in Left 4 Dead, and explaining that you wouldn't survive certain zombie apocalypses and what happened to the survivors after Left 4 Dead. These videos have millions of views on them, and people want to know more about these non-existent worlds that they were so immersed in. They care about these characters and feel like they know the zombies so well from all their encounters, and want to hear other people's theories and see if it adds up. I think no games show this better than the Eco trilogy. If you haven't watched this, you need to watch the decade-long quest for Shadow of the Colossus' Last Secret.
Thread was called Quest for the Last Big Secret, Mysteries of Shadow of the Colossus. He continued,
Fumito Ueda is infamous for his attention to the most minute, intricate detail. Such appears to be the case with most of the Forbidden Lands. Ruins lay toppled in the most likely angle. Coastlines bear signs of erosion. Even the dress on Mono's lifeless body is gently pushed back and forth by the wind. It is this same attention to detail, however, that would be the inattentive gamer's downfall.
It is so good and really gives an idea of how great game design can impact players and how great writers can really empower the players to think, feel and create their own stories. So now that you've designed these AI to be real creatures within the world that you've made, and built them to be relevant to the players, and have also designed them to communicate who and what they are to the player, the final stage is to tie them into the mechanics and the systems in the game. So going back to what Truby said, final step is then we'll figure out the function each must perform in helping your hero develop, and that's what this stage is. So doing it in this order will make this next step feel commonsensical to you, because you've already fleshed out the character fully. They're a real, like an actual real person basically at this point. You've already established their relationship to the main character on top of that. So this step should feel really natural and easy. This system allows you to make really great AI that interact with others and interact with the world as well. Along with coming up with the mechanics and the movesets for these AI, you can also design how they work in relation to each other too, because you know how they work with each other. You've just got to put it down on paper now. And this will make it really easy for the player because it'll feel intuitive when they do it, because it's just common sense and it's all telegraphed in the design. Monster Hunter World's Turf War system is a great example of this. This is similar to how in Skyrim I figured out, hey, why don't I get this dragon and this giant to fight and I'll clean up the rest. I think a lot of games that don't do this, like Burnout Paradise, I played it recently to get some gameplay for this video. I really liked Burnout Legends when I was younger, but Paradise, it feels fun, but after you do all the events a few times, it's really kind of pointless. because there's no narrative whatsoever, there's no end goal. It's just do this number of races and then you'll get your next driver's license level, so you can have more races to unlock your next driver's license level, and it gets old really fast. And then you have games like Death Stranding that kind of miss out this step altogether. They created an amazing world with a gripping story and good characters to go along with it, but the gameplay was not gameplay.
This would be a masterpiece if there wasn't a game attached to it. This is a great movie that unfortunately has a shit game on top of it. Everything else that's not gameplay is superb.
From what I've heard and seen, the gameplay is just used as filler to get to cutscenes, and its mechanics were objectively bad. You couldn't really get better at them. It was literally like hitting your head against a wall, and eventually the wall's gonna break, but you don't feel any better about it. Your head hurts, it's taken 20 minutes, and you didn't improve or do anything. The whole zipline system is literally just to avoid playing the game.
Some of the certain enemies you encounter, some of the BTs, some of the pretty much everything in this game is gorgeous and its design is flawless. The villain Higgs, he looks great. It's just so beautiful to look at, an absolute marvel. But then there's that gameplay.
So this stage is really important, and as I mentioned before, you want all the AI's characteristics to be consistent so they can send a message to the player. This is how I might act, and you probably want to deal with me in this way. Wouldn't it take you out of the experience if boomers were jumping around like the hunters, climbing buildings and leaping across streets? Or from the audio side of it, imagine if you gave the tanks a roar to the stealthy smoker. Like imagine if he just told you where he was constantly by roaring. These cues are really important with dangers off screen, and especially when the enemies are superior to the player in some way. Or it could be friendlies that need your help or are offering you something. Zombie games do it really well.
Oh my god. I didn't even know it was suicide, I just heard him saying help me.
Oh, I just ran up to it.
And here's another nugget of gold from the Halo devs.
In Halo, there are some AI that can jump higher than the player or run faster than the player, such as the Flood, but a good rule of thumb is if you can give your AI an ability the player doesn't have, as long as that ability is recognizable and the limits of that ability can be easily predicted.
A lot of games use music for boss fights so that they can put the player into the mood and tell them this is going to happen. These sorts of cues are learned by the player, whether they can tell or not, they can feel it, and that's what's most important. You know, Resident Evil and games like Doom do this famously, where they give you a lot of ammo and health, and it's like, oh god, what are they going to do to me that I require this much health and ammo? Like, how are they going to abuse me this time? Best way to see if your AI is well designed is to playtest them, and playtest them and playtest them. Have gamers and non-gamers play and have them guess what they can do or how they act. And if they can't guess, it happens in a lot of games because it's a mythical creature, or like in Cuphead where their attacks are weird and quirky. The person should at least see them and say, oh, I get that, that makes sense. In short, you need to empower your player enough to allow them to blame themselves for their failure instead of the game. All good games is to a degree. The trick is to basically just make your player feel like the underdog, like the odds are in the enemy's favour, but never to make it feel unfair. Games like Sekiro and Dark Souls that are notoriously hard do this really well. You know exactly what the problem is, and you know that you can solve that directly, and it all really depends on you. And that's what you want to do. You want them to feel like the amount of effort they put into creating strategy and tactics and getting glue and upgrading stuff actually matters, and it was their choices that led them to winning. What you don't want to do is take some variables out of their hands and make them feel like it's just kind of by chance that they lost, because at that point, what is the point? Hollow Knight does this in a great way. It trains the player for harder challenges. It shows the player the movement patterns before using it to challenge them. They start off with simple problems that they face, and as they get deeper into it, the challenge becomes harder and more complex, but the challenge never becomes anything completely different, it just evolves. And in these games, the bosses will have improved variations of the attacks of bosses before them and the mobs leading up to them. And this creates this feeling that no matter how impossible it seems to beat the boss, because they are super hard, that you can actually beat them because you have already technically beat them and experienced what they do, just not in that way yet. And in terms of damage and health or scaling difficulty, one example I love is Metal Gear Solid 5's enemies that adapt to counter your playstyle and tactics. Left Left 4 Dead and Resident Evil are famous for the dynamic difficulty, which is cool and all, but it's not suited for all games obviously. And again, I can't tell you exactly what you need to do, but we should already have an idea of what your answer should be, since you've already completely mapped out the enemy, who they are, their supposed challenge to the player, what stage they'll meet the player at, and from there it's a lot of playtesting. Some of my most meaningful experiences, lessons and relationships I've had were from these non-existent worlds in the books I've read, movies I've watched and games I've played. And everything in real life is so fake nowadays because people have just been trained to think that success comes from money and popularity. So as a game designer, I just want to create a world that doesn't exist but allows the player to have some real and meaningful experiences. So I hope you enjoyed it and learned something. Once my head gets back into a better condition, I'm going to start working on a game again. Stick around if you would like to, I'd really appreciate it. Leave a like, start a discussion in the comments, I'll definitely reply and I'd enjoy that. And that's all I have for this video. Bye.